Hello, I'm Ibrahim Imam, and welcome to another episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast, in which we will continue discussing the theme of dystonia. Um, I'm joined on this occasion by Tom Seaman, who has lived with dystonia since 2001 and has devoted his life to worldwide education and awareness of this life-changing disorder. We'll be talking about his journey, which he narrated in his memoir, Diagnosis Dystonia, Navigating the Journey. Tom is a certified professional life coach in the field of health and wellness, and he works directly with people who have chronic conditions, and he helps them to manage their physical, emotional, social, and vocational challenges. He's also a motivational speaker and chronic pain and dystonia awareness advocate, and he has presented at national symposiums and events held by the American Brain Foundation, the American Academy of Neurology, Merz Pharmaceuticals, and Allergan, among others. Tom is also a volunteer writer for Chronic Illness Bloggers Network, The Mighty, and Patient Worthy. His story has also been featured in Brain and Life magazine, Pain Free Living magazine, and Pain Pathways magazine. Tom has also written another book titled Beyond Pain and Suffering, Adapting to Adversity and Life Challenges. And he has also written hundreds of articles on dystonia, pain, and emotional health topics. You can learn more about him on his website, www.tomseamancoaching.com. You can follow him on Twitter at dystoniabook1, and he's also on Instagram, Coach Tom, at Coach Tom12. Tom Seaman, thank you very much for joining me for this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. I'm most grateful indeed.
My pleasure, and thank you. It's great to meet you.
Thank you. The first question I usually ask is why people write the books they write. What was your motivation for writing this book?
Well, when I was first diagnosed, I sought out as much information as I possibly could find, and there was, aside from some of the national support groups and maybe a handful of books, I didn't find a lot of resources that were available. So I really wanted to try and put together something that filled that void.
I did struggle to get a lot of patient memoirs for dystonia, so you're quite right.
Yeah.
And how did you go about writing it? What did you keep diaries, or did you have to go search your memory for what you went through?
Kind of a lot of that. And I want to just make one clarification. It's not actually a memoir. I
Okay.
would say part of it really is it discusses my experience, but I think it's more of a resource of information filled with a lot of information about the condition itself, about the various treatment protocols, dealing with a lot of the emotional, social, the emotional side of dealing with any kind of chronic health condition, especially one that is that is not well known. So I say that because that was part of how I went about writing my book. So originally, I don't remember what it was that initially got me motivated to decide to write something, but I just felt like I had been involved with a bunch of support groups. This is pre-Facebook, where all the support groups are now.
Mm.
And I had a couple of support groups I was involved with, and I started my own, and had a lot of people who were still asking lots of questions that I was asking about 7, 8 years prior, and I realized there hadn't been a whole lot of advancements in terms of information. So I began to start writing about my experiences, what I went through, what I thought might be helpful. And I only got about 2 or 3 pages, and I thought I had a lot more in me, but apparently I didn't. So I kind of backed away from it. And then I would occasionally revisit it and just start writing a little bit again on different topics. And again, I would hit a roadblock. And so I retreated from that for a little while. And then I began to speak with some of my friends and ask them what they were looking for that was missing for them through their particular specific journey. And I began taking notes on those types of things. And I had a good friend who, at the time, we were in contact via phone and email a lot. And she said, I think a really good foundation for you would be to go and review all the emails you've sent to me and many other people over the past several years. And you'll notice all the different topics and ideas that might be good areas for you to expand upon. So I did that, and that helped me. But again, I felt like I was not really getting where I needed to be in terms of an actual book that I felt comfortable putting out. So I then, during that period of time, is when I went back to school for my life coaching certification. So I kind of was pulled away a little bit from the dystonia community during that 2 year period of time. And then after I completed that program, I still felt this need to write something along with doing the coaching. So I joined a lot of different groups to again to reconnect with some people that I lost contact with, but also to see what are people currently talking about. What is the current climate of the community? I reached out to the various organizations around the country and worldwide to see what work they were doing, to see where I could possibly put together information that would fill the void and some of the gaps, and perhaps answer some questions that people were asking, and then expand upon those things. And once I did that, the floodgates kind of opened, and I went from only a few pages to over 300 pages of information. And then I wrote most of it while I was not at my computer. It was when I was listening to a conversation I was having with someone, or maybe a meeting we were having, a group call, or just listening to people who I've read and people who've inspired me and gave me ideas for topics that I thought might be helpful for people. And I also began to reflect on the prior, I guess it was about 12 years at that point prior, because I began writing it in 2012 and finished in 2015. I began thinking about the 12 years that I had lived with this, and the things that I had gone through. And I mainly beyond the physical and the treatments, a lot of the life changes that took place, and there were many. And I really wanted to address that area more than anything else, because I think that was an area that was most neglected by my doctors, and from what I heard from others, from their doctors as well. And I really wanted to fill that what I felt was a void that was missing in people's lives. So I've got a picture of me that has little pieces of paper, probably hundreds of them, little scrap notes here, and post-it notes, and things that compiled the entire book. So it was just a lot of thoughts and ideas that I had, and then I would expand upon, and I then research, and then I would connect with others. And so it's kind of a long answer to your question there, but it was a process that was varied in terms of my approach. It wasn't just have an idea, let me sit down and write it all out. It took years to put it all together. And I think I had been writing a book for years just by living it for years. I just hadn't sat down and done it, but it was upon reflection of all the things that I had been through and all the conversations I've had with people over the years that gave me the idea for a lot of the topics that I wanted to share in the book.
Okay.
Uh,
A good incubation period, and a lot of input and thought that went into it. Um, as a neurologist, dystonia is one of the most nebulous things we can diagnose in terms of how varied it is. And I sometimes struggle to tell my patients what dystonia is. How would you describe what dystonia is to a layperson in your view?
It's a really good question, and I've answered that question and shared that explanation with people in different ways depending on the setting.
Yeah.
But essentially, what is happening is that there are involuntary movements in the muscles that is caused by the parts of the brain responsible for movement that are not communicating correctly. It's a neurological condition, meaning that it's a brain-based condition, and the messages that are being sent to the body are, for some reason, not doing so in the proper fashion, which causes the involuntary movements, which can affect any part of the body. And the reason it affects different parts of the body, I do not know, but for me, it does affect my neck. So I have cervical dystonia. So that's kind of one of the ways that I would describe it for people. I often say it's in the same family as Parkinson's and essential tremor, which people are more familiar with. So then they get more of a, oh, I understand a little bit better. But I also describe that in most cases it is not considered a progressive disorder like Parkinson's is. It does not affect cognition. That's Parkinson's in terms of that mental decline that can occur as well. So basically, a neurological movement disorder that causes involuntary muscle contractions. That's my baseline definition, and then I'll either water it down or I will make it more advanced depending on the interest level and the audience in which I'm speaking.
Okay. Well, I think that's succinct enough. Uh,
Yeah,
and your symptoms started, I think, around the age of 30 years.
30. Yeah, I was 30.
How did it start? What did you first experience?
First noticed I had very, very slight head tilt towards the right that only I could notice.
Okay.
But I could also feel slight restriction turning my head to the left and to the right. And it wasn't something that you'd experience after maybe sleeping wrong and getting up and it disappearing. It was lasting all day long for, well, since 2001. But it was something that did not go away. So it was extremely mild head tilt and slight restriction moving my head left and right. Those are the very first symptoms that I noticed. Also, when I walked,
Yeah.
it was interesting, my head would flop to the right with all the way down with one step, and then it would go upright with my next step. So whenever I was walking, it was completely without a control, almost as if the muscles had become so fatigued, which is kind of strange because in dystonia the muscles don't become fatigued; they become strong with the contractions and the spasms. So when it first began, I felt like I had no neck muscles at all. So I kind of thought that I had, just been neglecting my strengthening and exercising routine. So I began to ramp that up a little bit, but that didn't make any difference. But those are the very first signs I had, which got to be much more severe beyond that.
Okay. And then how did it progress? Was it kind of a slow escalation, or how did things progress from?
Yes, it was. So the initial symptoms of the restricted movements and the head tilt became more severe week by week, month by month, until I was turned and locked, really more tilted and turned a little bit towards my right shoulder and locked in position where any kind of movement I would pull even further down to the side. So it was a constant contraction that locked me in position on that side. So I had no rotation towards my left at all whatsoever, and I had full contraction down towards the right shoulder.
And at the time you were doing your master's degree, I think, in counseling,
Yes, master's in counseling, correct.
and you had to attend classes. Was it kind of a strategy to try and relieve it? Was it?
Yeah, I was cupping my chin when I was sitting in class, and I was also working as an intern at the Career Development Center. So since I was taking a master's degree, a lot of the classes were condensed, so we were taking 3-hour classes once a week. And sitting that long with that uncomfortable feeling in my neck put me in that very familiar chin cupped in your hand position that a lot of people with dystonia, cervical dystonia, will assume. And that helped to relieve the tension that I was feeling because my shoulders and my back began to be recruited to try and stabilize my neck. So that took a lot of the pressure off. But what I learned over time is that the more I sat in that position, the less I allowed the compensatory muscles, the non-dystonic compensatory muscles to do their job. So I don't think I was helping myself other than feeling more comfortable at the time. I think I actually slowly worsened my symptoms and that cupping created a forward head posture, which for anyone is not a good position to be in for, proper postural alignment that can cause, all sorts of other issues as well. So it helped me in the moment, but I think long term it probably wasn't the best idea.
Okay, that's an interesting insight. A lot of
Yeah.
people with dystonia talk about these sensory tricks to overcome it, but it comes with the
And,
darker side then.
and I'm glad you said that because I don't know, and you being a specialist in this area would know more than I would. Um, I don't consider that to be a sensory trick so much as just a light touch to your chin or your forehead or your nose or even somewhere else in the body. Typically, it's in the facial area for cervical dystonia versus actual forcing your head down. I think it's just the light touch. Now, I wish I knew that sensory tricks existed and what they were, or I came across one at that time, but I didn't even know I had dystonia at that time, so I didn't even think to do a light touch. I just did what felt comfortable. And I had probably been doing that since I was a kid in school anyway, when, kids get bored in class and they sit there with their hands like this. So perhaps that was just part of the normal way of sitting in the class, but I know that mine had more of a reason for doing that. So I really wish I had known what sensory tricks were. I found something else that would have helped me
Okay,
more so than the cupping of the chin and resting for hours on end.
okay. No, always learning. It's one of those complicated conditions that I think is different for different people. Then you used a
Yes.
soft collar neck brace. Was this recommended, or you just thought I will give it a go?
It was not recommended because I wasn't seeing anybody who had any idea what was going on. I had seen about at the time I was seeing anyone and everyone I possibly could. And I thought, somebody may have recommended it. It's been so many years, I don't remember, but I think I just needed some kind of support, and I thought that might help. So at first, I tried a one of those more stabilizing plastic hard ones that held your chin up, and that caused me extreme pain. So I didn't use that one. So I found a soft collar, and it provided me with relief similar to the hand cupping, the relief I would get from cupping my chin when I was sitting. It gave me relief. It gave me more comfort. I was dealing with anxiety as well because I didn't know what was going on, and the involuntary movements causes a lot of just a lot of fear and worry and concern, and results in chronic anxiety. That gave me a sense of protection and comfort and control that I didn't have otherwise.
Okay.
But I found, and also I used it when I was doing activities around my house, like vacuuming or cleaning or doing the dishes or eating. And then what I noticed though is that if I wore it for too long, when I took it off, I was more symptomatic because those muscles were being the again the compensatory muscles were not being worked enough, and that brace kind of weakened the compensatory muscles that made the dystonic muscles more active. So for short periods of time, it was very helpful emotionally and physically. But over time, I think if I wore it too much, it was detrimental to me. So I'd try to stay away from using it as much as possible after I learned that.
How much of distress did it cause you in public in terms of embarrassment and things like that?
It's interesting. I, at first, when I began to notice the mild symptoms, and I didn't know what it was, and I felt very self-conscious, I was extremely uncomfortable, even though nobody had any idea I looked anything different, nothing was wrong. Even when I pointed it out to certain people, they didn't notice. And I recall at the time, as you mentioned, I was going to graduate school, and we had to give presentations, and that was something I always enjoyed doing, but it was very uncomfortable because I was afraid everybody would see this tilted neck, even though it was only off just a slight bit and only I noticed it. When my symptoms got to be more severe, where it was extremely obvious, where I was locked to the right in position, I wasn't self conscious in public at all because I couldn't hide it And at that point, I also was in so much pain and I was so miserable that I didn't have I don't think, the emotional fortitude to even care what people thought. It was only in the initial stages of it being very mild where it was almost like getting a really big pimple on your nose and you knew everybody could see it versus your whole face being filled with, chicken pox or something where it's like, well, I'm full blown out there now. I can't hide it. So I was in the early stages of wanting to hide it. And then when I couldn't, I didn't care anymore. So that, that is probably not the case for everyone as we're all different. But for me, it was when it was very mild when I felt most uncomfortable.
And at what stage did you start looking for a clinical diagnosis? How early did you start looking for an answer?
This began July, August, roughly 2001. And again, it was very mild. And I thought it was a musculoskeletal issue. And I had had many years of good experiences with chiropractors. And I had known about various techniques. And based on, I used to work in a chiropractic and nutrition education company prior to developing this. So I had become familiar with a lot of different techniques and approaches, and I found somebody in town where I was going to school who utilized a technique that I thought would be helpful. So we did the X-rays and the initial examination. They didn't ever mention any diagnosis other than just symptoms, and then those symptoms were treated, and he wasn't helping, so I went to various doctors at the school health center. They had no idea what it was. I went to other doctors in town. They didn't know what it was. I went to everybody except for a neurologist, and I never even thought it was a neurological condition.
Hmm.
Nobody ever said it's a movement disorder. You should see a neurologist. It never ever was mentioned to me. So here I was looking for answers and a diagnosis, all from the wrong people.
And I mean, this dystonia became very extreme, and you said you declined rapidly due to an inaccurate diagnosis and improper treatments. Is that what you are describing just now? Then it's
Just now, yes. So I was seeing all these different doctors, a variety of chiropractors, physical therapists, medical doctors, internists, I said PTs, massage therapists, acupuncturists,
mm,
others as well. I just probably can't think of them all right now.
on list.
Um,
Yeah.
and some of them, like the chiropractors in particular, that's the PT and the chiropractors, I think, are the ones that didn't know what it was and treated me in ways that made me exponentially worse. And like I mentioned, I'd worked in a chiropractic world. My brother's a chiropractor. He's been a chiropractor since the mid 80s. So I've been around it since I was a kid, early teenager. So I was very familiar with it. And this one chiropractor took a very volatile approach that was above and beyond anything I've ever experienced before. And within 2 weeks of his neck adjustments, wearing head weights, going into full extension with weights hanging off my head, doing various traction. I do find traction to be helpful if it's done correctly, but this was over the door, weird, very archaic type of traction. A few other things as well. Within a short period of time, I'd say within 2 weeks, I could barely lift my head off the pillow. It got to be so bad.
Okay.
So, but I had been getting worse anyway, to the point where the initial the person who was seeing me said, I don't know if I can really help you anymore. Let me send you over to someone else I recently met here in town. And then that person took me rapidly down a very, very bad path very quickly. So that's when I really began to search the internet. And again, back then we had dial-up, so it was a lot slower. So it took time, and it was very painful to sit there. And that's when I came across, for the first time ever, spasmodic torticollis, which is another, usually a bit of a more older term than cervical dystonia.
Mm.
And that's the first time I ever heard the word torticollis, the first time I ever heard spasmodic torticollis, and the first time I ever heard dystonia. And then that's when I reached out to the medical center at the college, the medical college there, and reached out to anyone and everyone I could find an email for and sent them a blanket message and said, "This is what I have. What are your recommendations for what I should possibly do to treat this, and who would you recommend seeing?" And I got a whole variety of different answers. But at that point, I didn't really follow through with a whole lot because I was in too much pain beyond that occasional sitting at my computer. I was on the floor all day long rolling around, holding my head in my neck constantly because I could barely speak or breathe because I was constantly in the pain I felt was similar to the pain you feel at the moment of an injury where it takes your breath away and completely stuns your body and you're just in shock, and it was being injured over and over and over and over and over. So at that point, it was mere survival.
Mm.
I didn't even look for a whole lot for answers as much as just let me just get through the day kind of a situation. So
And did you self-refer to the neurologist? I know you saw a neurologist at Duke University who confirmed the diagnosis.
correct, yes.
How did you get
Yeah,
to?
so I had self-diagnosed, and I think that I on my own, I don't think I was under the care of anyone at that time. I contacted and I was able to get in to see a doctor there, and she confirmed the diagnosis.
And offered you what is still offered as first line now, Botox, but you declined it then.
I did, yes. And I did because it was so new to me. I didn't understand what it was and its mechanisms of action and how it might be able to help me. So I said, let me think about it and I'll come back in a few months. I'll make another appointment. I'll think about it. I'll discuss it with my family. At the time, I had no health insurance. I couldn't afford it. And I went and I discussed it with my family and friends and loved ones. And I for some reason just didn't feel comfortable putting something in my body I didn't know enough about.
Okay.
So I wanted to do a little research first.
Yeah.
I eventually did go back to see that doctor for Botox
Okay.
and did not get any relief. And I went for another visit and did not get any relief. And so I decided that I would try something else. And I came across a more natural approach, which involves stretching, exercising, and a variety of different other factors that came from the Spasmodic Torticollis Recovery Clinic in New Mexico here in the States. And that was something that's my body seemed to respond better to than the injections, because I've had the injections dozens of times with a lot of different doctors over the year. However, after following that protocol, I wasn't really improving as quickly as I would like, so I got very angry, very depressed. There was an expectation by me and by others that this was no different than a broken ankle or a broken wrist where you put a cast on for 6 weeks, you take it off, you do a little rehab, and you're back to normal. Life goes on as usual. That didn't happen. And with that came a lot of deep depression, isolation, abandonment from the world. I felt useless. I felt hopeless. I felt like someone who was very capable had become someone who was now just taking up space in my parents' home where I had to move back because I had become so financially in debt from all these doctors I was seeing and the inability to work. I was experiencing emotions I had never experienced to the extent that I was. The amount of suffering I had was so deep. I I considered suicide on numerous occasions. Um, I just felt so empty on the inside, yet at the same time so full of anger and sadness and frustration and loneliness because I lost connection with the world. People couldn't relate well to what I was going through because very few people are familiar with living with or knowing someone they're close to that has something that's so chronic and life changing. as it was for me because I couldn't keep up with my life. I couldn't keep up with my friends. I couldn't keep up with any of the activities I was doing. So that broke my heart, and I went into complete isolation away from all of that because any exposure to that caused me even more pain.
Was this when you noticed or discovered that alcohol has some beneficial effect on your symptoms?
Even at my worst, I did not feel comfortable getting Botox, taking many medications, but it got to be so bad that I finally said I have to do something. So I began to research as much as I could about the medications being used for dystonia, and I found that Klonopin or clonazepam was one of the most commonly ones that were used. So I went to the doctor I was seeing at the time, and I brought all the information. I said I'd like to try this out, and they gave me the prescription for that, and I found that to be helpful. To get to your answer to question about alcohol, since I was on the medication, I was able to do a little bit more than I was before. And my sister, who lived a couple miles away from me, had a pool. And I found that being submerged in water felt really, really good than freestanding. So I would go to her pool as often as I could and was well enough to get in the car and drive, which was not was not very easy. To go over there just to get my body submerged in water, which was very, very helpful. And while I was there one day, someone said, "Hey, you want a beer, Tom?" And I said, "No, no, no, no. I'm on this medication. I don't want to drink anything, not at all whatsoever." They said, "It's not gonna. There's no interactions. Don't worry about it. It'll, if anything, it'll make the medication work even better." And I thought, well, heck, I'm in. Sign me up. So I had a beer, and there was no ill effects. And there was no increased improvement either, but there were no ill effects. So every once in a while, I'd have a couple of drinks. And then I began to notice that a couple more drinks helped me get more relief and relaxation. And after several years of dealing with this, I was in need of anything that would provide me with some relief. And that's when the alcohol sort of became my treatment of choice for about 5 years, in addition to an awful diet, to the point that I was drinking a 12 pack or more a beer a day for 5 years or so, and had an awful diet. And I went from a 190 pound athletic fit person to morbidly obese 340 pounds. So it spiraled very quickly for me.
Mm.
And the alcohol, I don't consider myself an alcoholic. I was using it more for just kind of therapy and treatment, and it became kind of my only friend. It was the only thing that kind of gave me comfort that would help me along the way. I didn't even like drinking. It made me feel sick, but it helped to calm down my symptoms. But it had a lot of other physical side effects that put me into serious weight gain along with a terrible diet that I had because I really stopped caring about life. I stopped caring about myself. I stopped caring about I didn't feel like there was anything that I could ever do again. I didn't think there was any hope because I had tried all of the so-called things that were the like Botox and some of the medications are the things that helped most people back then. And DBS surgery wasn't really talked about very often back then. I don't even think it was approved at that point for dystonia, even though people had gotten it prior to it being approved. Many years prior, I know that a few people that have had it, some friends of mine were some of the first people that had it done. That was never discussed with me, and I don't know if I would have done it or not. But the things that were supposed the things that were supposed to help me were not, and I found something that helped me, so that's why I decided to drink.
And I think one of the consequences was your blood pressure went sky high.
Yeah, it went up. It wasn't sky high, but it went to the point where I was definitely hypertensive enough where it required me to be put on blood pressure medication. And that was around 240 pounds, 250. And I just sort of at that point was like, well, this is really not so great that I'm now having to resort to this. Here I am at like 34 years old and I'm on blood pressure medication. I weigh 240 pounds, and I guess it didn't make enough of an impact on me because I gained another 100 pounds beyond that.
Okay.
I went to 340 pounds.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So that was that really didn't bother me so much that I was taking it. It was just something I just, again, I reached a point in my life where I didn't really care about a whole lot. And I was, again, so filled with so much anger and envy and jealousy for people who could go out and do things and I couldn't do anything. And to
Yeah.
see all that around me was almost like taking a fresh, raw piece of meat and dangling it in front of a tiger and saying, "Ha ha, you can't have this." And that's how the world was for me. So I closed out everything that I possibly could and tried to numb myself as much as possible. So the blood pressure medication being put on that was at that age for the reasons that I was just one more thing on top of a pile of a mess that I had already been dealing with. So it wasn't a whole lot more that really impacted me in a massively negative way until a year or two later when it did, and that's when I made some life changes to get everything, a little bit more under control.
So what triggered the turning point? Was there anything specific?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. It's kind of silly in some ways. I was waking up for probably 3 years, throwing up every morning from my drinking episodes and my stress and my sadness and the emotions that were filling me up as well. It was almost like my alarm clock. I could feel it coming, and that's what woke me up every morning. Um, and I had reached a point where I knew that I had to stop this lifestyle, but I was afraid to. I was getting enough relief, even though I had a lot of discomfort. I was getting enough of a relief for the dystonia. I was afraid that if I stopped drinking, I might go through withdrawal. I might have far worse symptoms again. And I was afraid to. But then I developed a stomach virus, and
Okay.
it was a very severe one. And I lived either in bed or in the bathroom for about 2 weeks. So I couldn't drink, I couldn't eat much. I was alone with my thoughts, lying in bed or in the bathroom, or, and as I began to get better, I said to myself, you're in your mid late 30s, and you're on the verge of a stroke, heart attack, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. What in the world are you doing to yourself? You need to make a decision because the stomach virus will go away. The
Yes.
dystonia will more than likely still be here. So you need to make some changes, Tom. So that's when I decided either I keep going down the route I was when I healed from the stomach virus and continue the destructive path I was on and basically die by 50 potentially or younger, or have some other serious problems, or choose the other path. And I decided to choose the other path because I wanted to live. I knew I had a lot more in me than what I had. I had a lot of life I wanted to live left over. And I also had a lot of really good, supportive, loving people around me that I didn't. A part of my suffering was seeing them suffer and seeing them go through what I was going through and having them feeling and looking so helpless all the time and feeling so hopeless.
Mm.
So that was part of my motivation as well, was to get better, to take the burden off of them, my parents in particular, the main two people that were mostly on my mind. But I wanted to live. I wanted to try and make something of my life. So I began to change my lifestyle away from the drinking, getting back to eating healthy, getting back to moving. At that time, I was still very overweight and I was still dealing with dystonia, but I began to start implementing some of that exercise program I had mentioned, and just began to live as healthy a lifestyle physically and emotionally as I possibly could. And in a year, I lost 150 pounds. I got back down to 190. I'm actually at 170 now, so I actually lost 170 pounds total over the last, whatever, 15 years. But within a year, I lost all that weight, and I also began to consistently implement that program that I gave up on 5 or 6 years prior. And I found a lot of relief from that, in addition to some of the medications I was taking that were assisting me. But Yeah, that was the motivation. Was I was sick of being so sick, and a lot of it being my own fault and my own responsibility. So I decided to take responsibility for my life and try and make a life for myself because I had nothing to lose.
Mm,
And so thankfully, that dedication to those things and many lifestyle changes helped me to get back into, a healthier body and a healthier frame of mind and reintegrate into the world again, which was another whole process, which was really tough because I had isolated for so many years.
yes.
So that was a turning point, was just getting a stomach virus. Kind of saved my life, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's interesting how life takes that kind of turn. Um, and the dystonia didn't flare up as you withdrew from alcohol and the life changes you made.
No, it did not actually. It stayed pretty steady.
Okay.
Um, there were no additional flare-ups of any kind, and I think that made me feel emotionally really, it gave me a sense of confidence and comfort that my body actually responded pretty well to. And then I thought logically, well, you're no longer putting so much toxic food and drink into your body that makes sense that you wouldn't respond in a negative fashion. I also began to slowly lose weight, which gave me motivation as well. So I began to get really excited.
Okay.
So my prior emotions of sadness and hopelessness became hope and excitement and joy and possibility. So I really, really, I'm really good at regimen and routine, and this became my new regimen and routine. That's how the drinking was. It was just part of my daily routine. I didn't even want to drink half the time, but I did because it was part of my routine. And I often felt anxious if I got off the routine.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why I didn't stop earlier, even though I could have. But that was one of the main reasons. So I then said, okay, use this regimented and routine oriented personality to do good things versus being self destructive and basically taking up space on this earth and being useless.
Well, there's a positive outcome there. Of the medications you've used, we talked about clonazepam. You also talked about things like baclofen. Did you find any of them really significantly change your symptoms or improve your symptoms?
I think the clonazepam was probably the most effective.
Okay.
I had taken baclofen also, which I still do, but I don't think it's doing a whole lot for me. I'm taking half what I used to take, and I didn't notice a change when I dropped from well when I dropped the amount.
Okay.
But I was also taking a sleeping pill, Restoril, which I didn't know at the time was another benzodiazepine, as is clonazepam, and I had from changing my lifestyle and dedicating myself to that program and losing all that weight, I thought, maybe I don't need so much of the medication anymore. So went to my doctor and I said, I'd like to start reducing some of this medication I'm taking, which at the time was Klonopin or clonazepam, baclofen, and Restoril. And they agreed. And that then led to an entirely new problem. They took the medication away from me. Not only they didn't take it away from me, they reduced it in amounts that were too large to taper me off and too quickly of a taper. And the doctor's mindset, which to me still doesn't make sense, was, well, since you've lost so much weight, what you're experiencing, because I began to experience withdrawal. They
Mm,
said, what you're experiencing are side effects of the medication because the side effects and withdrawal symptoms mimic each other. So they had taken me off even more medication and I kept going downhill for 2 years. I was barely able to stand up. I was having all sorts of horrible symptoms. And then I had a friend share an article with me about the nature of benzodiazepines, which is a class of drugs that those are in, for those that are not familiar with that, and realized, oh my goodness, I'm in withdrawal. So I went to my doctor and I said, this is what's going on. This is why I'm experiencing all this. And he said, wow, you diagnosed yourself again. He said, I have a friend in town who helps people work with medications, and so I saw him, and we were able to stabilize those withdrawal symptoms, thankfully, because I had become almost as incapacitated with withdrawal symptoms as I was with my dystonia,
Oh dear.
but without pain, thankfully. And during that period of time, which was really interesting, is my body almost went into a full remission for about 2 years when I was going through the withdrawal symptoms, because I think that my body had become so incredibly weak that I had lost almost all muscle tone. I lost lots of weight. Like I said, I could barely stand up. I had visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, all sorts of proprioceptive issues, vestibular issues. And during that time, again, I saw about a dozen different doctors for those different symptoms and was being treated for vestibular disorders and eye disorders and all sorts of other things. And I got myself stabilized. My dystonia kind of came back a little bit, which was interesting. So I don't know why that all took place, but I think I think the takeaway from that for anyone listening who is on these medications, who has who has gone through withdrawal, or a lot of people will experience an increase in symptoms when medication is removed from their system in a rapid pace and they're on a fast taper. That just shows how highly variable the symptoms are for people and how we all respond and how different everyone's chemistry is. So there's no one size fits all when it comes to dystonia or medications, the effectiveness of medications, the tapering process. If you're in withdrawal symptoms, etc., it's a highly variable type of a situation. So for me, while it was absolutely miserable, in other ways, the dystonia kind of took a back seat for a while. And then when I got stabilized, it kind of came to the front seat a little bit more. So it was an interesting kind of a situation to go through.
I think that probably is what you are referring to when you said dystonia may be my evil twin at times, but we have learned to work with each other and get along much better than we once did. What's the current state of your dystonia? What is it like now?
Let me answer that in two parts. First off, that's a quote that I had put in the book, and what I meant by that is for the first 5, 7, 8 years of living with it, I hated dystonia. I fought against it. I was angry at it for what it did to ruin my life, and I learned that the more I fought against it, the more I resisted it, the less I embraced it, the less I embraced the suffering and the misery I went through, the less that I faced what was going on, and the more angry I was, the worse it became. So I had to become friends with it. I had to talk to it. I had to find a way to live with it. No different than anything else about myself that I don't like, that I can't change. And I had to learn to be okay with it, with life not being okay. I had to look at it as a part of me and not something outside of me that took me over and ruined my life. Because that's merely a perspective, and I could change that perspective. And a quote that helped me change that perspective was from someone named Wayne Dyer, who said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So I began changing the perspective of I hate dystonia to not I love dystonia, but well, hey, look, we're here. I don't know why this all happened, but I refuse to go through this for nothing, and I'm going to do what I can to work with my body by listening to my body and become friends with it, because it was my enemy for so long. So it was almost like I created a self-induced autoimmune disease, even though it wasn't autoimmune, but my mind and my body were fighting each other. So when I allowed myself to reduce that anger and frustration and befriend the dystonia, things began to improve. So my current state of dystonia is kind of interesting. I still have restricted rotation left and right. I still have pain in my neck, shoulders, and back. Nowhere near as severe as it was. Obviously, I wasn't able to speak for a while because I was in pain. It wasn't because I had any kind of oral mandibular or vocal dystonia or dysphonia. It wasn't because of those things. It was because I was constantly in pain. So I was talking like this all the time because I was gasping for air because the pain was such that it was always, it was like the moment of injury all the time where it takes your breath away. So since that has gone, since I've improved upon that, I get fatigued very quickly. Not very quickly, but I will get fatigue. I will get, the pain will kick in. I still have vestibular issues, balance issues. I have an interesting thing happening now when I have pressure against the back of my head and also now the sides of my head. I will have mild to violent rotational dystonia, rotational callus, torticollis to the right, and even some oral mandibular types of symptoms. But it's the moment you take the pressure away, it's okay. So the problem with that is sleeping is extremely difficult because putting my head on a pillow, my head is jerking hard to the side. So I have to sit up without any pressure against my head and get tired enough where I'm falling asleep and then quickly jump into bed and then fall asleep. So I still have all of the same symptoms I did have. They manifest in different ways at different times based on different stimuli. I'm still, as a lot of people are with this condition, I have sensitivity to visual and auditory sensations. Not all the time, but at times I have those as well. I have, it's not constant, but almost constant muscle rigidity. I've also had I've had changes due to the severity of my symptoms for so long to my spinal column where I've developed scoliosis and some herniated discs. And I have really three curves, one big C curve in my spine. And then I have kind of two quick little jagged turns in my neck. So my body actually kind of moves more off in this direction where my head translates off to the side this way. And you may even be able to see that in the video, I'm not sure. But it's not straight up and down as I would like it to be. But my joints and my vertebrae and my muscles have adapted to a new posture, which I'm still working on to try and improve. But I get headaches as well. But they're all very mild compared to how they used to be. Now, if these were the initial symptoms that I had, I would classify them as far more severe than I do now. But I compare them to how they were. And to me, it's not really much of anything in comparison, although quite miserable still. but if it were, it's not. But since it's not isolated to this being how it started, it's something I can deal with and learn to work with.
Okay, so that's the lesson in kind of learning to live with it. You became a certified life coach in 2012. Was this something you've always wanted to do, or was this choice informed by your experience of dystonia?
It was informed from my dystonia of experience. I never heard of life coaching in my life until someone mentioned to me in 2008 or 9, I think it was, because when I had made in 2007 that drastic change of losing weight and getting much better, I'd say 75% better control of my dystonia, I I I was asked to write a couple of articles for different dystonia publications, and I got involved in support groups and different things, and I connected with a lot of different people via phone and email, and I then began to help. I made some good connections with certain people, and one or two of them said, "Hey, you'd be a really good coach, a life coach." And I said, well, "What's that?" And they told me about it. I looked at it and I said, "Well," I said, "I don't like the word life coach because that means I feel like I figured out life, and here I am to teach you how to figure out life." So I'm not a big fan of that title. I prefer consulting versus coaching, quite frankly. But but the certification I do have is coaching. So I looked into it and realized it was very similar to what I was going to school for, my master's degree, which was counseling. And since I wasn't able to financially or physically handle the demands of that counseling program, I decided to get into this 2 year certification program to become certified as a coach, which allowed me to work directly with people like I had been doing anyway, because I was already kind of doing it without knowing I was doing it or know there was a name to it. And that's what got me going. But once I completed that, I didn't know what to do with it because I'm not really good at self promotion and advertising. It actually makes me very uncomfortable and it's not my cup of tea. And that's when the idea of writing came in, and that's when the whole book started. And so the book kind of preceded the coaching that I began doing since 2015, when it really kind of picked up a little bit more than it had been after my graduation, because it just sort of all happened sort of organically and naturally, and I just kind of went with the flow of it all. But it all stemmed from all of my experiences with dystonia. So most of the people I work with have dystonia or other movement disorders or chronic conditions. But I've also worked with a lot of people that are just dealing with some really tough life situations, as we all go through. Because all of it across the board, if you're going through any kind of life-changing situation, no matter, I don't want to label it anything specific, the emotions are all the same across the board. So you can coach anyone just by changing the approach in terms of their situation, or the focus, I should say, regarding their situation. So, but I've primarily been working with people that have dystonia. That's the main focus.
And as a life coach, what 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 lifestyle changes do you most commonly advocate, say for people with dystonia?
It depends on the individual. It depends on their current lifestyle. It depends on their current desires and interests, and what they're seeking. So I don't steer anyone in any particular direction. I I I let them set the goal
Okay,
and support them and provide them with resources and accountability for reaching the goals that they want to attain. So my lifestyle changes and approaches are different than what somebody else might want to make or need to make.
okay.
So it's there's no cookie cutter approach to that.
No shortcuts.
No, unfortunately, there's not.
Okay, and then you became a volunteer for the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation. What does it do, and what's your experience of the foundation yourself?
So I joined. I've been a part of that organization. I don't know how far back it goes, roughly 2009, 10. And then they put together a bunch of different online support groups on Facebook. And actually, I was a part of their bulletin board prior to Facebook, where they had a support group. I was involved with that. And then I became involved with their online support groups. And one of the leaders of the group was looking for someone to help her. So about 10 years ago or so, she invited me to see if I would be a co-admin of that group, which I've recently pulled away from, being holding that position. I'm still involved and active in the group, but I'm in the various groups, but I'm no longer taking on the role of an admin. But it was a really great experience, and still is a great experience, to be able to connect with people in that environment, and to be in the role of an admin,
Mm.
dealing with a little more closely with people who may be struggling and reach out privately looking for help, and to be in that supportive role, and hopefully provide support and direction and comfort to people, has been very helpful for, hopefully for them, but also for me in terms of my learning, because I learn a lot from people and what they're going through, because we all go through things differently. Our perspectives are different. And I learn from those perspectives because they change and open my mind to new options and possibilities and things. So So overall, it had been a really good experience for me and a good learning experience. And hopefully, I provided a safe place and space and support for people that are involved.
Okay. Um, what, if you're going to put three as a number, what three lessons would you say you want readers to take away from your book?
Wow. I think the very first thing is hope.
Okay.
That was the one thing that I was looking for early on when I was looking for answers to what was going on, and even after I was diagnosed, was there hope for a life?
Mm,
And so in my book, I provide a lot of information about my experiences. I also have many testimonials from other patients, and I also provide many options for people that um, they may not know to even consider, and they may have questions they don't even know to ask, which is how I was. So to keep an open mind, to realize that you can get through this, and then you can work with this to have a fulfilling life. To keep an open mind to the many options that are available for managing this above and beyond that which a doctor may provide. Patients are often really good at finding some of their own types of things that have been helpful for them. So that's a big takeaway, hopefully, as well. And also consider more of your emotional state and the stress that you're going through, the toxic environment you may be living in that may be involving other individuals. It may be what you're doing to yourself, as it did to me with the poor eating and drinking and other lifestyle habits. Another takeaway and lesson I'd like for people to have is to embrace this as much as possible and try to not fight it, because it's going to only fight back and make things worse. Because when we fight things, we ramp up that adrenaline, which ramps up more stress hormones, which will create that loop and that cycle of pain and anxiety and anger and adrenaline and more spasms and contractions, and then more pain and more anger and frustration. And we need to break that loop by changing the way that we look at this condition. And well, I keep saying and because there's so many things that I would like to say, but I don't want to keep going on and on and on about this. But
another
I
one.
think it's important to really what I really hope people will see from the book is that there are many different ways to work through the many different facets of this condition, be it physical or emotional. And there are people out here who understand what it's like, and be patient with yourself. Allow yourself to express whatever emotions you're feeling. You need to purge yourself of those. But if you follow the path I took, where you live in that state of mind of misery, self-imposed misery and anger and hopelessness and helplessness, and the victim lifestyle as I did, things will not improve. We need to change the mindset and try and find options for how we can get better. But at first, allow yourself to express those emotions and then become proactive versus reactive to everything that you're experiencing.
It's an interesting concept, the way the mind can actually modify the physical disease itself.
Yeah, and everyone says stress makes it worse. So if we take that truism and expand upon that, then maybe there are other emotions that we're experiencing that may also be contributing to our condition, and there may be some relationships where people in our lives that may be contributing. There may be some work factors. If you're still working, there may be a lot of other things going on that are creating emotions you may not be aware of that could be also contributing. And I'm not saying that this is in your head or
Mm,
anything like that, but we can't neglect the emotional side of this, because the emotions will create chemistry in the body that will create more symptoms.
yeah,
That being the case, it's important that we really do address that mind body connection, which is critical for so many health conditions.
yeah, that's a very important takeaway. The next may not be a very fair question. What are the major questions or uncertainties you feel exist in the field of dystonia?
I guess the best answer I could probably give from my perspective is that the problem and major challenge and obstacle is that there are no biomarkers for dystonia. You can't do an MRI, CAT scan, blood samples, spinal fluid, tissues of any. There's nothing that can be tested and therefore studied in that regard unless you have a genetic form. Now, I may be missing out on some of the science that's out there, and if I am, I apologize for anyone listening that knows more, and hopefully they'll comment and they'll share that information.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with people at Mayo Clinic and elsewhere, and they said, dystonia hasn't really come as far as a lot of other conditions. And I think the reason why is because it doesn't get enough money, enough funding, and it doesn't have the biomarkers, and therefore lack of interest in people wanting to study that. So I think the key, most important thing is we don't have biomarkers, and the highly variable symptoms that we have in, first off, the highly variable manifestations of dystonia from person to person. So, as you well know, we have, well, any part of the body can be affected. And you can have someone like me with cervical dystonia, which is a focal dystonia. They may have it in their hand and perhaps their foot. So they have multifocal. And then you have people that have it in their eyes and maybe their mouth and also their neck or maybe their arm or a leg. And why is that the case? Or generalized. And then you have people that have musicians dystonia. And why does it only happen, or singing, people who are performers or athletes, and they have it only when they're performing it. So it's task dependent. So it's such, how do you figure out the chemistry and the dynamics of the brain structures that are working or not working and communicating and not communicating to why did it manifest in my neck versus my hand or somewhere else? And why did it happen where it was chronic and didn't happen when I was performing an activity like eating or something like that? Why? So there's so many whys, and even if you were to take somebody who has, and I spoke to a researcher about this years ago who was married to a woman who has blepharospasm,
Yeah.
and he said that the challenge that he saw or he sees in this area is that in order to really do some solid double-blind placebo studies, you have to get enough people in a control group that have the same manifestation of symptoms that are so close that you are able to then, use that control group against another group. And his wife, when her blepharospasm, which for those listening is when you have dystonia of the eyes, where the eyelids will involuntarily close and open and your eyes will blink, when she speaks, it stops. Her blinking goes away. When she's not speaking, that's when it's active. There are lots of other people where the opposite happens. And then there are some people that when their eyes are active, they then have oromandibular dystonia, so they can't speak, or they may have dysphonia, where it affects their vocal cords. So with so many different manifestations of the same form of dystonia, how do we get enough people? So that's where the biomarkers, if we can find them, would be so critical to research and the advancement of treatments and possibly get closer to a cure, whatever a cure means to an individual.
Mm.
So I think we all have a different definition of what a cure is.
And that answer is as scientific as they come, even though.
Oh, good. Good. I'm not a science guy so much as the other
Well,
side, so
because
that's
scientific, I
good.
think biomarkers are the key thing for a lot of disorders now.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, just a quick word on your other book. Is it Beyond Pain and Suffering, I believe? What is that about?
yeah. I have a copy of it here. Yeah,
Okay.
it's called Beyond Pain and Suffering: Adapting to Adversity and Life Challenges. And I wrote that book for a variety of reasons. When I wrote my first book, Diagnosis Dystonia: Navigating the Journey, um, and again, this is funny. It started out maybe that much, and it became that much, and I keep adding to it. So um, anyhow, the other book, it started out Many people I knew that did not have dystonia read my dystonia book. And because I don't focus strictly on dystonia, but I talk about a lot of life challenges, they said this book was really helpful for me, but I never would have picked it up because of the title. And unless I knew you and you had, wanted to read it and you suggested it. So it'd be great if you had another book that had information that was applicable to other people going through other health conditions or any kind of a life challenge.
Okay.
And I had a lot of people who had dystonia that have read the book that found it to be very helpful and said, we look forward to another book. We want more information. And 6 years after writing my first book, I had come across and learned a lot of new things. And a lot of it was more of a mind body type of an approach, and attitude and emotional understanding I didn't have prior. So I wanted to write something that was more, I don't want to say generic, but had information in it that was not specific to dystonia, that was more for anyone going through any challenge at all whatsoever, be it a health condition or any other life challenge, and how to navigate some of those really tough situations that we have, that we all go through in life.
I think the last question, are there any books you would like to recommend, either on dystonia or any relevant theme?
Yes, and along the lines of what we were talking about regarding the mind-body connection and how important emotions are, there are three books that I think of. The first one is a book called The Way Out,
The way out.
which is written by Dr. Alan Gordon,
Okay.
and it's about neuroplastic pain, but neuroplastic, not so much neuroplastic pain. It can be expanded into any kind of other health malady, so not just for pain, but they do focus on pain. The other book is written by someone from the UK, actually. Drew Coverdale wrote a book called The Pain Habit, which is a brilliant book, and both of them also have really good online. They have really good Facebook pages, groups pages that provide a lot of good information. So yeah, so the way out. The other one is The Pain Habit, and I guess to give myself a little plug, my book, Beyond Pain and Suffering. I think that book actually falls in line with the mind body approach that these people talk about, which I have found to be extremely helpful with my dystonia in years past, but especially now with some other health issues I've been dealing with, and helping me learn how to mentally wrap my head around them and approach them in a more proactive way than reactive way, that has helped to decrease the overactive, hypervigilant, on alert nervous system that I have, that a lot of people have that live with dystonia, other movement disorders, pain, and any other condition that is life changing that also affects them emotionally. So those three books are the ones that come to mind along the lines of what we've been talking about, that I think would be really helpful for people if they're willing to embrace that side and not just dealing with physical symptoms. That's incredibly important to deal with, but if we neglect the other, then I don't think we're going to get as much improvement as we could otherwise.
Okay. It sounds, I mean, all the titles sound like bright light at the end of a dark tunnel. There's some hope at the end, the way out and beyond pain and suffering.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's a key thing, is that people, I think, want to know, can I get better from this? And the answer is yes, you can. You're not going to be guaranteed that, but if you find the right recipe for you, you can live your life as normal as you always have before. So this is not a life sentence. This is not something that's going to own you the rest of your life. For some people, it will. I have to be honest, it's going to. It's because there are, as you've seen, many severe cases of this condition and others out there. But I hope that people would look at my story and see that, while I still am dealing with symptoms and have to manage my day and make a lot of changes to my lifestyle, and I've had to pull away from certain things that I used to do, that I have been able to come from wanting to kill myself to being able to write a couple of books, to be able to have the honor, and it truly is an honor to speak with you and others in these types of environments and in venues, and connect with people that I never would have otherwise, and also and find ways to improve. So hopefully people will find hope in my story and in the stories that I have shared in a lot of the information I've put out from others who have found their way. And that's the key thing, is to find your way versus trying to follow the path of someone else. You have to find what tools are going to help you in your toolbox, whether they be your own at-home self-care type things or what you do to incorporate with your doctors, because we have to remember that the lion's share of care comes from us. You know, we choose our friends, we choose our what we put in our bodies, we choose the we choose everything basically. You know, doctors give us advice, information, and treatments, but we need to do a lot on our own as well and be a part of a team working together in order to, I think, achieve the best results possible.
Tom Seaman, on that very practical and hopeful juncture, I want to thank you very much for participating in this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. I've actually enjoyed and learned a lot of perspectives. Thank you very
Good,
much.
good. Well, thank you.
And to my audience, thank you very much for watching or listening to the podcast. If you found it enlightening, do click on the like button. And whilst waiting for the next episode of the podcast, you might want to also check my book, Surfing the Brain. And I also have a website called Neuro Checklist. Tom Seaman, thank you very much. And I'm very grateful once again.
My pleasure. And it was great to meet you. And thanks so much for having me.